We will be continuing with Barry and the Boys, the CIA, the Mob, and America's Secret History by Daniel Hopsicker. Chapter 1. This is going to be a long one, guys, so strap in. All our secrets are the same. This is the story of Barry Seal, the biggest drug smuggler in American history, who died in a hail of bullets with George Bush's private phone number in his wallet. It looks like a hit, said Baton Rouge Police Chief Wayne Rogelio. Daredevil pilot, gunrunner, CIA covert operative extraordinaire, a soldier of fortune, are a few of the tags journalists have stuck on Barry Seal. They felt from the beginning it was for hire, FBI Special Agent Ed Grimsley stated. It would appear from the way it happened, it was well planned and well executed. But the most common description of Seal in the press was a wealthy, convicted drug smuggler working as a federal informant in hopes of leniency. It'll empty a 20-round magazine before the first casing hits the ground, ATF agent Jim Adamkek stated about the MAC-10 machine gun used in the killing. 10 years after his death, the Wall Street Journal gave Barry Seal another tag. They called him the ghost-haunting Whitewater. Barry Seal and the goings-on in Mena, to which he is inextricably linked, have been an issue in 3 consecutive presidential elections, and now a fourth with allegations resurfacing of Seal's involvement in a DEA sting in which a group of red-faced federal officials netted a nonplussed George W. Bush Jr. This is a remarkable testament to the fact that nothing can remain totally hidden from the American police body politic. But that's not to say that both major political parties aren't still giving it the old college try. This book will tell you why. Barry Seal was dead, gunned down by 2 quick bursts of a fully automatic, silencer-equipped MAC-10 machine pistol in the most visible assassination in American history since John Kennedy's. The killer had been lurking in the shadow of a garage dumpster, lying in wait when Seal maneuvered his large white Cadillac into the parking lot at 6 p.m. and backed into a parking lot. The shooter approached from the driver's side, firing 2 quick bursts from his machine gun, ripped through Seal's head and body. He saw it coming and covered his ears with his hands. Then, with his head settled into the Cadillac's steering column, Barry Seal slipped into history in the soft Baton Rouge twilight of February 19th, 1986, dead instantly. The shooter dashed back into the getaway car and it sped off, forcing a pedestrian to leap out of its path. A bystander later said he heard the men inside the car laughing. The newspapers called Seal's killing a gangland-style murder. But in Webster's dictionary is another word which more accurately describes what happened. Assassination reads this definition is murder which changes the world, because when Barry Seal died, taking with him the answers to questions that congressional investigators in 2 major American scandals were never quite able to puzzle out for themselves, it was indeed murder changes the world. What Seal could have revealed had he lived would likely changed the course of American politics in 1998, 1992, and 1996 presidential elections. But since the death of Barry Seal, very little light has been shed on the dark secrets about America which he carried to his grave. It looked like they were getting rid of people who knew too much about Mena, stated one observer at the time. A high-rolling mercenary, a rogue pilot, an infamous gun runner, the chief Mena narcotics trafficker, a fast-talking, self-assured, 300-pound pilot and Special Forces veteran, a notorious drug smuggler, a mystery man, and the most valuable informant in DEA history. Barry Seal has been called all of those. Seal's life was so exciting that Hollywood has already made it into a movie, Double Crossed, starring Dennis Hopper, and his daredevil persona was too big to be contained by just one name. He was Ellis Mackenzie to the Colombians, Thunder Thighs to his fellow drug pilots, El Gordo to Honduran military authorities, Bill Elders to the press, and his life as many Byzantine turns as his numerous nom de grace attest. Though he was a contemporary of James Dean, Barry Seal was another kind of American icon, while Dean always played the outsider. The suave Seal was the master of the inside movie, an American James Bond with his own Learjet, as American as the crawfish etouffee in one of Carlos Marcello's New Orleans restaurants. Seal, a close friend of pop singer and fellow Baton Rouge native Johnny Rivers, may have provided the songwriter the inspiration for his hit Secret Agent Man. And although the name Barry Seal will go down in history in connection with the Arkansas scandals of President Bill Clinton, Arkansas was not the place that nurtured him into the swashbuckling figure he became. He grew instead from the fertile culture of Louisiana, the only place in the Western world where you can get a drive-through daiquiri in a monogrammed Go Cup. Louisiana, run by Mafia Kingfish Carlos Marcello, is where Barry set up his illegal air cargo airline, which someone once dubbed... Okay, I think I have 2 pages. No? Which someone once... No? I did skip 2 pages. They're sticking to each other. Okay, here we go. Louisiana, run by Mafia Kingfish Carlos Marcello, is where Barry set up his illegal air cargo airline, which someone once dubbed Air Cocaine. And Louisiana, with its overripe culture reeking slightly of Roman decay, is arguably as far away as you can get and still be considered to be in the United States. More than just the setting of the story of more than just the setting for the story of Barry Seal, the state whose license plates boast sportsman's paradise is a character in the drama in its own right. How is it, we asked former Baton Rouge Advocate reporter John Seaman, who worked the Seal beat there for many years, that the people of this small fish bayou infested state have managed to have a powerful influence on the course of national events? His answer, when it came, was succinct, poignant, and rendered in the local dialect. They eccentric, he stated simply, and so are they. And so they are. The dramatic saga of Louisiana native Seal has already been the stuff of numerous bestsellers, Partners in Power by Sally Denton, and Roger Morris, The Secret Life of Bill Clinton by British journalist Ambrose Evans Pritchard, and Compromised by Ted Reed and John Cummings, first to bring an incredulous nation an account of what went on in Mena, Arkansas. At least one writer, Arkansas State Trooper L.D. Brown, was reportedly paid a tidy sum not to write about it just before the 1996 presidential election, which makes it too bad nobody offered to buy and then not publish reporter Danny Casolaro, who was murdered in Martinsburg, West Virginia in 1992, reportedly en route to meeting an informant with evidence of CIA and NSA involvement in the drug smuggling through MENA in support of American military operations in Central America. Well before his slaying in 1986 at the age of 46, Barry Seal's colorful life had made him famous in the native Louisiana. But the events which gained him national recognition strangely both occurred after his death. In the first, President Ronald Reagan went on national television in March of 1986, less than a month after Seal's assassination, to announce that the Sandinistas were involved in the drug trade. Mr. Reagan brandished photos purporting to show a top Sandinista official, Federico Vaughan, loading cocaine onto a plane alongside Seal and Medellin drug lord Pablo Escobar. Looking visibly angry, Reagan said, "I know every American parent concerned about the drug problem will be outraged to learn that top Nicaraguan Sandinista officials are deeply involved in drug trafficking." Reagan's evidence, though he never cited its source, was photographs taken by Barry Seal from hidden cameras in the back of his Fat Lady C-123 military cargo plane in the Nicaraguan drug sting operation, for which he was later called the most important government informant in DEA history. The second event which made Barry Seal famous came 7 months later. It became the milestone event of the Reagan 80s, the shooting down over Nicaragua of Seal's C-123 military cargo plane with Eugene Hansfuss on board. The crash cracked open the Iran-Contra scandal and inspired an ambitious burst of emergency damage control by Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, who embarked on a 3-day shedding spree reportedly designed to remove any trace of the name Barry Seal from his files. Even with North's 3-day head start, congressional investigators later discovered in North's remaining notebooks over 500 references to drugs in just the files North and Co. designed to declassify for Congress, in the same spirit of noblesse oblige shown by the CIA in 1997, when it announced that it was clearing itself after investigating itself of allegations of drug smuggling. Lieutenant Colonel North's ties with Barry Seal are covered in this book, as former CIA pilot and lawyer Gary Ediel remarked about North going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than going to a car wash makes you a car. Also covered as the persistent allegations of ties between Seal and former President George Bush, as well as his two sons, Jeb and George W., we found a drilling rig moored in Mexican waters that served as a safe harbor for drug smuggling. One Southern lawman told us, "When we set up a sting out at Tanamami Airport in South Florida, it was aborted, a way higher up and the last possible minute. Upon discovery that the Bush brothers were flying in on the King Air we were tracking." But this is not a scandal of any one political party. Several of Seal's fleet of smuggling aircraft we will learn, were owned by a man whose personal attorney was the then head of the Democratic National Committee, Charles Manat. Small World Manat was also the political mentor of his leading congressional voice, calling for an accounting of the CIA's involvement in the drug trade. California Democrat Maxine Waters, and he is today the U.S. ambassador to the Dominican Republic, whose countrymen, law enforcement resources say, have come to dominate narcotics distribution on the eastern seaboard. It is instead a scandal of what sociologists call elite deviance, a condition which exists when the elite in a society begin to believe that the rules no longer apply to them. Scandal in contemporary U.S. life is an institutionalized sociological phenomenon, states Professor David Simon in Elite Deviance, is not due primarily to psychopathological variables, but to the institutionalization of elite wrongdoings which has occurred since 1963. Many of the scandals that have occurred in the U.S. since 1963 are fundamentally interrelated. That is, the same people and institutions have been involved. Barry Seal's life and violent death provide the perfect illustration of this idea. The official story about Seal, the cornerstone of the Iran-Contra cover-up, can be boiled down to a few succinct statements. Drug smuggler turned DEA informant Barry Seal conducted the most important sting in narcotics enforcement history when he flew to Nicaragua in May and June of 1984. The CIA rigged a hidden camera in the plane, enabling him to snap photos of several men, including Pablo Escobar and high-ranking Sandinista official Federico Vaum, loading cocaine aboard his C-123 military cargo plane. These pictures later resulted in the indictments on narcotics smuggling charges of the Medellin cartel, George Ochoa and Pablo Escobar. In retaliation, Seal was murdered by cartel hitmen 20 months later. This official version of events, we will learn, is a complete lie, scripted and orchestrated at the highest levels of government in Washington, D.C., in an operation which swung into high gear before Seal's bullet-ridden corpse had ever been delivered to the Baton Rouge morgue. Why has so much energy been expended to cover up the circumstances of death of what the Clinton Chronicles called just a sleazy drug smuggler? The answer lies in the tiny hamlet that has been dubbed the conspiracy capital of the Western world, Mena, Arkansas. For well over a decade, distributing allegations have dribbled out about a clandestine operation in Mena involving arms sales, drug trafficking, 2 American presidents, and all the elements of a fast-paced thriller. Daring drug smugglers, gun runners, duffel bags filled with cash droppings from the sky, murder by ambush, revenge in the dead of night. The scandal, too, rival any in history of American politics. In outline, it goes like this. Mena, a town in far western Arkansas, was the base for a large clandestine CIA aviation operation in the 1980s that flew weapons to the Contras in Nicaragua and returned from Central America with drugs which were then distributed throughout the United States with protection from both the state and the federal government. Mena, Arkansas is just a small town of 5,000 or so souls, attached to an international airport than little bigger than the little engine that could, one waggish law enforcement source told us. And to top it off, it's tucked away in the farthest corner of one of the hardest to get places in the lower 48 contiguous states. It's as apt a characterization as any for why this small town in the foothills of the Ozarks should have become the center of controversy in both the Iran-Contra and Whitewater presidential scandals. The greatest story never told, British journalist Ambrose. Pages stick on this book. Had to get it off eBay. They weren't selling them anymore. The greatest story never told. British journalist Ambrose Evans Pickard called what happened when someone finally tried to tell it. In the winter of 1995, Dr. Roger Morris and Sally Denton, veterinarian investigators with established reputations, sold their detailed and well-documented piece on Barry Seal and Mina to the Washington Post for the largest sum paid by that paper's Saturday Outlook section. These weren't a couple of kooks on the internet. Morris had worked for the National Security Council at the White House under Nixon, taught at Harvard, and was a Guggenheim Fellow and National Book Award winner. Denton was a respected author and former head of UPI's investigative unit. Their story, The Crimes of Mina, had already passed an excruciatingly long vetting process overseen by the paper's lawyers and was cleared to run on 2 full-facing pages when the Post abruptly canceled it after the galleys had already been set, pulled at the last minute by the paper's executive editor under circumstances that are the very definition of murky. As Post nemesis Ambrose Evans Pickard reported gleefully in his paper, The London Telegraph, the article was typeset and scheduled to run. It had the enthusiastic backing of the editors and staff of the Sunday Outlook section, where it was to appear after 11 weeks of soul-searching and debate. Lawyers had gone through the text line by line. Supporting documents had been examined with meticulous care. The artwork and illustrations had been completed. The contract with the authors had been signed. The executive editor of the paper had given his final assessment. But on Thursday morning the piece was canceled. Continued Evans Pickard. It had been delayed before, so often, in fact, that its non-appearance was becoming the talk of Washington. A cover-up of the biggest scandal in American history. It's down to naked politics now, Morris said in the heat of journalistic combat. We've jumped through every hoop. We've given them everything that they've asked for. They can't say the story's not credible now. Based on Barry Seal's own archives of more than 2,000 documents, the article, when it finally came out in Penthouse, reported that western Arkansas has been a center of international drug smuggling during the 1980s and the headquarters of perhaps the biggest drug trafficking operation in history. But Post managing editor Robert Kaiser told reporters that there was nothing to this non-existent story. He dismissed it as a reprise of rumors and allegations. I am confident that it doesn't have any great revelations, he said, especially after reading it. Others were less confident. Its contents appear to be absolutely explosive, said one insider. When the Washington Post arbitrarily decided that the discovery of the drug smuggling capital of the century was non-news in America, the London Telegraph stated with consummate British understatement that the treatment of the article would fuel claims that the Post had engaged in active suppression of the news to protect either Clinton or the CIA or both. But few Americans got their news from the British press, and by killing the story, the Post was successful in keeping the scandal out of the mainstream media. Sally Denton and Roger Morris' effort, the initial serious journalistic tellings of the story of Barry Seal, then went on to become something of a journalistic cause célèbre. And just as doubts about the lone nut theory of the Kennedy assassination first surfaced among the knowledgeable elite, so too did word of the Mina scandal, spreading first among the new digital cognoscenti. With the emergence of the internet, there the inconsistencies of the official versions of events quickly caught the eye of jaded public cynical of its government and prepared to believe it capable of almost anything, as you should. But of drugging its own citizens? That's a tough pill to swallow, and it would have seemed too bizarre to even contemplate until the CIA drug story got what's known in the trade as legs, with the publication of Gary Webb's Dark Alliance series in the San Jose Mercury News. Webb's series showed how U.S. intelligence had facilitated the distribution down to the street level of the flood of narcotics that washed away the infrastructure of America inner cities in the 1980s. Street-level drug kingpins like Freeway Rick Ross and CIA operatives like Don Lister instantly became well known. You know this is not something that comes into the daylight easily, Webb told us. It comes out inch by inch, inch by grudging inch. And with every inch given, the reporters pulling it out from underneath the rug were systematically discredited and criticized. I did part of a chapter in Dark Alliance about Barry Seal and Mina because it was so similar to what the drug ring that I was writing about was doing in El Salvador, Webb continued. One of the things I found fascinating was an FBI report on their 4-year-long investigation into the Dan Laster drug ring. Leicester. Dan Leicester drug ring. Never heard of that guy. I discovered a secret FBI report tucked away in the FBI's own annual report that described Leicester's organization as a vast drug operation that they had uncovered, and I could never figure it out since it doesn't jibe with what happened. The investigation stopped at Leicester, and he got a slap on the wrist as if he had been dealing maybe just a kilo here or there. But the FBI description is that his was a monstrous operation. They don't send organized crime drug task forces after the businessmen taking a couple of toots now and then. These are major investigations. There's clearly much more to that Mina investigation than we know about. Gary Webb's curiosity earned him the reward today's newspapers reserve for gutsy investigative reporting on politically sensitive issues. He was ostracized. His follow-up stories went unpublished, and after being transferred and taken off the investigative beat, he left journalism. A journalist of our acquaintance was recently asked, "What qualities are top newspapers looking for today when hiring?" He replied, "The ability to stand there with your hair on fire while assuring your readers you can't smell smoke." Journalism has failed America, and often on the subject of the drug trade. Barry Seal's death in 1986 was front page news in major metro centers of the drug trade in the southeastern United States like Miami, New Orleans, and Baton Rouge, Louisiana. But there was a parrot-like sameness to the coverage, as if every news outlet were reading from the same DEA handout. No attention was paid to the massive inconsistencies of in the official version of events. And faster than you can say, lone nut gunman of the Medellin cartel was blamed for Seal's assassination. In each journalistic retelling of the assassination, Barry Seal was the drug smuggler turned informant who goes down for ratting out Pablo Escobar and Jorge Ochoa, the top cocaine barons of the Medellin cartel. Seal, described as the most important drug informant in U.S. history, is left unprotected by vengeful Louisiana authorities who don't take care that he's been providing crucial testimony in some of the biggest drug prosecutions in DEA history, to be machine gunned to death outside a halfway house in Baton Rouge by cartel hitmen exacting revenge for breaking the code of silence. A sample from the Miami Herald. Excuse me. I need something to drink. How did a man described as the most important drug informant in U.S. history find himself alone in a seedy Baton Rouge, Louisiana neighborhood? Unarmed, unguarded, a sitting duck for assassins eager to collect the $500,000 bounty on his head? John Seaman covered the Seal saga better than most from the perch at Barry's hometown Baton Rouge Advocate. Seal was a trusted courier for the cartel leader Jorge Ochoa Vasquez, who Seal said was pioneering a new cocaine distribution route through Nicaragua with the help of the Sandinistas. The resulting sting operation made drug enforcement history and blew Seal's cover under an undercover informant. As an undercover informant. A $500,000 contract on Seal's life followed, and Seal was murdered shortly before he was expected to testify about the Nicaraguan sting operation against powerful Colombian drug czars under indictment in Miami. But even a cursory examination of this story reveals that Seal himself had not shown any nervousness or anxiety about being assassinated by the Medellin cartel. He had even explicitly denied that he had anything to fear from them just weeks before his death. The Miami Herald reported, after a bitter argument with federal officers in his hometown of Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Seal chose to serve out a probationary sentence at a local Salvation Army halfway house instead of enrolling in a federal witness protection program. Seal told the DEA the cartel would never try to kill him for turning informant. He said it was just business, one DEA agent remembered. Barry Seal was not murdered by the Medellin cartel, we discovered, and the cover story that George Ochoa, head of the Medellin cartel, has had Seal murdered in a contract killing is as much a big lie as anything ever churned out of Nazi propaganda mills during World War II. Incredibly, on the night Barry Seal was killed, 3 other top lieutenants of the Medellin cartel were also assassinated. Pablo Ochila, Pablo Carrera, and brother-in-law Jorge Ochoa. The coordinated operation committed murders occurring simultaneously in Miami, Columbia, and Baton Rouge. It's as if The Godfather, Robert Duvall, Jimmy Caan, and Al Pacino all got whacked, and newspapers the next day pinned the blame for the killings on Marlon Brando. Even more incredibly, they've gotten away with it for 13 years. They've made it stick. One intelligence veteran termed it a classic disinfo campaign. Through contemporaneous TV news coverage reporting the murder of Barry Seal, linked it to this larger drug world slaughter. In the newspaper, articles, and books that have been written since Seal's murder is always treated as a solitary event. This is America's secret history. Barry Seal was murdered in an intelligence operation that was the blackest of black ops, an underworld putsch of terrible dimensions, and then completely covered up. And why it's taken 15 years for the facts to begin to seep out leaves many who have delved into the subject with a nauseous feeling in the pit of the stomach, a queasiness normally associated with those incurably existential French. Gary Webb felt it. I thought the CIA drug story was very depressing, frankly. I mean, my dad was a Marine for 20 years, as I grew up on military bases, and I was a true believer. You can't live that kind of life without believing very strongly in what your father stands for, and what your country stands for. And it sure as shit didn't stand for drug trafficking. What remains of America's free press isn't the only institution spooked by the immensity of the scandal of Barry Seal's officially sanctioned drug smuggling. The story frightened poor testosterone-impaired independent counsel Kenneth Starr so much he tried to flee Malibu to take up surfing with Pepperdine law students. His Whitewater inquiry had once raised hopes of getting to the bottom of allegations of government-sanctioned drug smuggling during the 1980s, generating headlines like Whitewater Probe to Eye Arkansas's drug ring. Congressional investigators are trying to find out who interfered with the ability of law enforcement to stop the flow of Latin American cocaine into the state of Arkansas, and why began the AP story on Starr's investigation. When Starr's report turned out to be nothing more than a weird all-Monica news channel, many were entertained by the absurd spectacle of dim-witted law professor investigating the sex life of a movie star president. But astute observers were left with the uncomfortable feeling that the American people had been left holding the bag on yet another 4-year-long investigation into corruption in Arkansas, which buried the scandal it was supposed to expose, proving only that the best way to cover up really major corruption in Washington is to appoint a special prosecutor. Why is there still such persistent interest in Barry Seal? Because there is abroad in America today big questions about illicit drugs. Who controls and who runs this most lucrative trade? Who profits? Anyone in, say, Washington, D.C.? It is patently absurd that the vertical integration of one of the largest industries in the world is so studiously ignored in the media. Had he not been such a larger-than-life character, Seal's story might have not attracted as much attention. But in the submerged world of covert operations, Biggie, as he sometimes called himself, was the whale that breached the surface while the tourists in the whale-watching boat had their binoculars pointed in his direction. The covert side of the American government has grown increasingly important since the early 80s. said one veteran of American military intelligence. Barry Seal had basically a middle management career in covert operations. Even so, the exploits of Barry Seal exceeded anything this side of a Tom Clancy novel. And it is, in large measure, a cover up of his activities and those of men from whom he worked, which has been at the root of the failure of American democracy in the last two major presidential scandals, Iran-Contra and Whitewater. Seal's slaying was a crucial first strike in a successful operation that effectively neutralized a key ingredient in any functioning democracy, the truth. It was the opening salvo in a cleanup operation designed to cover the tracks of what has been called the most massive covert operation in this nation's history, Operation Black Eagle, run in large part out of Mena, Arkansas. It became a network of 5,000 people who made possible the export of arms to Central and South America and the import of drugs from the same places to the Central and South America, and the most important drugs from the same places the weapons went. It went far beyond a simple operation to finance the 50,000-man Contra Army, according to the retired Navy Lieutenant Commander Al Martin, who was a participant. Black Eagle eventually created an intricate web of state-sponsored fraud, as well as trafficking in narcotics and weapons. Events during Bill Casey's tenure as Director of Central Intelligence led to several questions never posed by Bob Woodward in his puffball book on Casey, which never once even used the word cocaine. Did a shadowy group of government officials and intelligence operators run Benedict Arnold's in America's war on drugs? If so, did the billions in soft money generated by Barry Seal's operations and the ones which succeeded it end up subverting the very democracy these operatives were sworn to uphold? Some may have thought that this sordid chapter in American history ended with Oliver North raising his right hand in front of the hot TV lights at the Iran-Contra congressional hearing, while spectators in the gallery chanted, "Ask about the cocaine smuggling, ask about the cocaine smuggling," but it didn't. The enterprise lives, generating more dirty cash today than ever. That's the sour reality in the quote from Marine Corps spokesman Lieutenant Colonel John Shotwell, who said of North, he could have gone to the moon and it wouldn't be in the file. Barry and the boys, the story of some of the things that didn't go into the file. So if Jorge Ochoa didn't order the assassination, who did? Just 10 days before he died, Barry Seal had threatened, in a typical display of fearlessness for which he was justly famous, to expose the gun running and drug smuggling that flourished in Mena, Arkansas in the early and mid-'80s. The man he threatened, Vice President George Bush. All three of the guys on trial states Richard Sharpstein, the Miami attorney for one of the three Colombians convicted in the killings, and told their attorneys that once they reached the United States, their actions were directed by a United States military officer whom they quickly figured out was Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. Barry was smuggling drugs for the government, says Homer, Red Hall, and electronics technician who traveled to Nicaragua with the SEAL on his CIA sting mission, designed to be a Gulf of Tonkin incident spurring a wider U.S.-Nicaraguan war. There's no doubt about that. The only thing Ollie North was trying to cover his tracks from what we were doing down there, working with the Sandinistas, North stepped into something that he tried to back out of, that he wanted to keep quiet. I know that we took a load of equipment and a bag full of money to buy drugs, and I set up all the communications for them, the Sandinistas, so they could talk back and forth, putting in high frequency radios from E systems. We supplied the Sandinistas with communications equipment, Hall said, and I don't think that's ever come out before, said Hall, the only living participant in the Nicaragua sting operation who was still alive. The only person who knew as much as North did about all this was Barry Seal. Barry knew it all. I can't figure out any other reason for his killing. Even in Baton Rouge, the night of Seal's death have been whispered about by investigators for years. One enduring mystery swirls around the appearance of what local law enforcement officials on the scene nervously referred to as the Men in Black. Later the night of Seal's slaying, a squad of FBI and other federal agents swooped down in force on the Baton Rouge headquarters of the Louisiana State Police and confiscated at virtual gunpoint material evidence in the case from investigating homicide officers charged by law with preserving it uncompromised for the prosecution of the capital crime of murder. It was a cleanup crew, pure and simple, said one state lawman who was there. The FBI went into Baton Rouge Police Department and literally and physically seized the contents of the trunk of Barry Seal's Cadillac on the night he died from the Baton Rouge police. In fact, the Baton Rouge police probably would have had to draw their guns to keep possession of that evidence, says New Orleans attorney Sam Dalton, who represented one of the 3 Colombian hitmen convicted of Seal's killing. Through the rules of courtroom discovery, Dalton's investigation gained access to something more valuable than gold, information, enough to glean evidence of a massive cover-up underway before Seal's body had grown cold in the morgue. Some of the things that had been in the trunk we didn't get back, but they had missed a few things that indicated just how valuable that trunk was. The Baton Rouge police should have, by law, done anything necessary to prevent the FBI from confiscating that evidence. Dalton shrugs, but they didn't. When he was murdered, Barry Seal had with him 3 boxes filled with documents that went with him everywhere. Forbes magazine senior editor Jim Norman later reported that found among those documents was the encrypted code number of a secret Swiss bank account containing over $10 million belonging to then Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger. According to Norman, a co-signatory on the account was a relative of the Senator Howard Metzbaum, Democrat of Ohio, which is why Congress is so squeamish about investigating this stuff. We are talking about bipartisan payola, Norman said in a letter to the managing editor of Forbes protesting their decision to kill his scoop. The clear implication is that Caspar Weinberger, while Secretary of Defense, was taking kickbacks on drugs and arms sales by arms/drug smuggler Barry Seal. The police officials who were present the night of Seal's murder still speak softly about what they saw. Seal's trunk contained compelling and, well, just say very, very compelling documents and tapes. Several briefcases, boxes, wherever Seal's Cadillac was, that was where Barry's instant records were, says one Louisiana law enforcement source who spoke to us, though reluctantly. He quickly added, "This is all third-hand, understand. From the way he stressed third hand, we knew he was speaking for the record, assuming we were being overheard, and this law enforcement officer had good reason to be wary. His family dog was decapitated and left floating in his backyard pool as a warning not to talk. He told us, a full 3 months after Seal's assassination. What about Barry Seal made unauthorized knowledge of him so sensitive? Behind the curtain of Barry Seal's life, beyond the Contra drug smuggling and gun running through Mena, Arkansas, for which he became justly famous, lies the story of the origins of his career in covert operations. It clearly indicates that Seal participated in many of the signal events in America during the second half of the 20th century, running guns to Fidel Castro in the mountains of Cuba, flying at the Bay of Pigs invasion, piloting a getaway plane after the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, flying to the Golden Triangle during America's secret war in Laos. Barry Seal even had a cameo role in the Watergate scandal. His career reveals much about the secret history of our life and times. That history, in other words, in which lone gunmen play no role. Following the thread of Seal's life will lead us back to the very headwaters of this secret history, Miami. Before the Bay of Pigs fiasco, the failed operation which introduced so many crucial players in our story, Brigade 2506, the shooter teams, Ted Shackley, Howard Hunt, Frank Sturgis, Felix Rodriguez, and George Bush. Seal was initiated into covert operations in Miami in the early 60s, when guys paid to protect us, CIA guys, hobnobbed, schemed, wheeled and dealed with people most Americans assume they're being paid to protect us against. Made guys, mobsters, organized crime. Miami was the largest CIA station in the world until the stink grew so bad in 1965 that the station was disbanded after its fleet of planes was shown to be engaged in drug smuggling. Then these men, Barry and the boys, all go off to Southeast Asia. Laos was where they went, because Laos was where the money was. Barry was not a soldier of fortune or a mercenary. He was a covert operative. It was the 70s. Well, it was the 70s when I saw Barry again, says friend Red Hall, delivering a bombshell right after he got caught flying drugs in a 747 out of the Orient during the Vietnam War. He had lots of government connections, that's a fact. Needless to say, no official record of this nor many other events in this story remains. Sparking our examination of the mysterious roots of Barry Seal's career was a conversation we had in the sun-drenched Santa Fe, New Mexico study of Roger Morris and Sally Denton, the team who first brought serious national attention to Barry Seal. We had been exchanging pleasant tidbits of information each of us had gleaned about our common subject, drinking cokes in the warm sun when they asked us, "What have you heard about Barry Seal having flown a getaway plane out of Dallas after the Kennedy assassination?" "We hadn't known that there was a getaway plane out of Dallas," we replied, and that was the end of it for the moment, but we never forgot the question. It's not the kind of thing you would then, while doing research in the newspaper morgue in Barry's hometown paper, the Baton Rouge Advocate, we struck up a conversation with the morgue librarian. She had a throaty kind of whiskey voice that you don't hear a lot in librarians, and after she grew comfortable with a Yankee asking questions, she told us casually in a sweet-as-pie tone, in which some Southern women couch their major revelations, My ex-husband, who was connected, told me that too. Barry Seal flew a getaway plane out of Dallas after JFK was killed. How long ago? We demanded. How long ago did he tell you? When did you hear about this? Hell, she said. A good 20 years. I've been remarried for 10. But it wasn't until much later after we'd heard stories about Barry Seal from his friends and classmates in high school that we began to realize what we'd sensed all along. It was true. One Friday evening, while we were in high school, I got a call from Barry asking if I'd like to fly with him in the morning over to Lacombe, a little town on the north shore across Lake Pontchartrain from New Orleans, said high school chum John Odom, who grew up 2 blocks from Barry. We left about 5:30 a.m. and flew over to a little airport there. And Barry and I got out of the plane, and there's this guy sitting in this Hollywood director's chair, dressed in all black, black military fatigues, black boots, and a black beret, and he's got the fake eyebrows, real weird. One eyebrow was turned up at a 45-degree angle, and the other was horizontal. I laughed when I saw him, but Barry told me to stay by the plane or he wouldn't let me fly back to Baton Rouge, and he was drilling a bunch of Civil Air Patrol cadets, all carrying the old M1 rifles, standing in formation in front of him. His name was David Ferry. He was a captain in the Louisiana Civil Air Patrol. Even if you're not a JFK assassination researcher, and we weren't, it's no secret that David Ferry played a role in David Ferry, played by Joe Pesci in Oliver Stone's movie JFK. It's on researchers' top 10 lists of people on the hit. He was, in fact, under suspicion of involvement in the assassination less than 48 hours after Kennedy died. John Adam had watched 17-year-old Barry Seal confer with David Ferry. He saw Ferry point out a 50 or so wooden crates staged next to the tarmac. Then, on the way back to Baton Rouge, he said that Barry told him that he was making $400 a week flying runs for Ferry, and that Ferry was CIA. The crates were weapons and ordnance, according to Seal. How'd you like to make that kind of money? Seal asked Odom, whose brother is author Richmond Odom. Our dad only made about $400 a month back then, and we weren't poor. John Odom, according to his brother Richmond, was stunned and didn't know how to respond. Finally, he told Barry, "I'll think about it." They never discussed it again. Later, we spoke to a doctor or a medical doctor, but still a man of science, which means he had a software program on his personal computer which translates dollar bill amounts from any year into current dollars. And we sat in silence while it did the math for us, and then while it recalculated it again, because neither one of us could believe the number flickering on his laptop screen. David Ferry had been playing young Barry Seal back in 1957, the equivalent of $2,500 per week. The well-known pictures of Barry Seal, which the general public has seen, include the one popularized in the Clinton Chronicles video, where Seal is a rotund and genial man waving to reporters and cameramen as he climbs the granite steps of Baton Rouge Courthouse. In another, he is a 300-pound, blood-soaked body draped across the front of a Cadillac in a ghoulish crime scene photo taken the night of his death in Baton Rouge. But the picture of Barry Seal which lingers in our mind is a haunting photo of a 16-year-old girl youth still in high school. In it, Barry is just a scared-looking teenage boy wearing a paramilitary Civil Air Patrol flight suit, preparing to step onto a U.S. Air Force plane bound for a 2-week summer camp of Louisiana Civil Air Patrol, and turning uncertainly to look back at the family which have come to see him off, seeking in their familiar faces some reassurance. The young SEAL looks like anyone might when leaving home for the first time, nervous, apprehensive, and uncertain after practice touch and goes all summer in a tiny Piper tri-pacer with the enthusiasm of a high school basketball star practicing free throws. He was bound that muggy 23rd of July 1955 for Barksdale Air Force Base in Shreveport. There, while America basked in the dawn of a golden age of aviation, with American planes ruling the skies as British ships had once ruled the oceans, cadet pilot Barry Seal will meet fellow cadets, Cadet Lee Harvey Oswald, and there both will fall into orbit of the freakish David Ferry. At the tender age of 16, in a flush of optimism that characterized American life in the 1950s, Barry Seal put on a military style uniform that marked him somehow as one of the chosen one of the elite. And then the overriding question posed by his extraordinary life and death is, was he not in some fashion still wearing that uniform when he died? Something strange went on in Louisiana Civil Air Patrol of the middle 1950s, something which led us onward, a trail of breadcrumbs, if you will, through the signal events of America's secret history in the second half of the 20th century from the Bay of Pigs to the Kennedy assassination to Watergate, and then to Mena, Arkansas. Barry Seal, we discovered, was a contemporary of Lee Harvey Oswald's in the Louisiana Civil Air Patrol, where both young men came under the tutelage of CIA pilot David Ferry, who was himself murdered. We will hear from cops working surveillance on Ferry when he died. The night before he was to be called to testify before Jim Garrison's grand jury probe of the Kennedy assassination. While still an impressionable teenager, Barry Seal came under the tutelage of a man you wouldn't want your worst enemy's kid to know. David Ferry, a pedophile, and worse. When we discovered this, we wondered, had no one known? Of course they had. Today, Delbert Hahn is a retired FBI agent in Baton Rouge and an amiable Cleveland Indians fan, but between 1983 and 1985 he was the special agent in charge of the Middle District of Louisiana Organized Crime Drug Task Force investigation into the Barry Seal drug smuggling organization. Delbert was asked, when you got the Barry Seal folder from the FBI, did it have a bright red flag on it across the top saying, started off in high school making a fortune with David Ferry, connected individual, checking with the desk sergeant? He never knew, he told us bluntly. What secret is there so big that FBI special agent in charge of multi-agency task forces aren't told? This is a story of something called elite deviance, a condition sociologists say exists in a society when the elite of that society no longer believe that the rules apply to them. You referred to the gentleman Barry worked for, David Ferry. I knew Barry had some unusual financing because he owned 2 airplanes by the time he was 18, said one of Seal's employees, pilot Joe Hurston. I'm going to tell you that there is a lot more to this that meets the eye. The man continued, I had an airplane that crashed with 7 souls aboard, one of whom was a representative of the U.S. Treasury Department. My aircraft was screwed with him, and I'm still very concerned for my family's safety. This individual was some obvious this individual with some obvious concerns was with Seal when he played his role in the Watergate scandal. When he was arrested less than 2 weeks after the bungled burglary by CIA Cubans like Frank Sturgis with 1,500 pounds of plastic C4 explosives destined for an anti-Castro Cubans in Mexico. Mina is very real, Hertzen concluded before declining to talk further, at least on the record, and what did happen back then is tied to that. And you mess with 72, and you're messing with Mina. And Mina is tied right into current stuff. So there is a strong connection, and you should be aware of it. You mean, and all this somehow. You mean this is all somehow connected, we asked. Touch one. You've touched them all, he stated solemnly. All these secrets are the same secret. Ironically, this is the same message we've heard from another part of the forest altogether. Academic David Simon, in a sociology textbook called Elite Deviants, Simon's book is in its 6th edition, so at least some social science types know the score. Leave it to a university professor to dish the news even to the raciest tabloid newspaper won't report. Go figure. What possible connection could there be between Barry Seal and the massive drug smuggling in Mena, Arkansas in the 1980s and the swirling intrigue in Mexico City in 1963 that preceded the Kennedy assassination? Long questions. We couldn't have imagined that there was one until we saw what we've come to refer to as the picture. It was taken at a nightclub in Mexico City on January 22nd, 1963, 10 months to the day before the Kennedy assassination, and it comes complete with the sort of frame nightclub photographers used to create a keepsake. Barry Seal, then a young-looking 24-year-old, is seated at a table with a mixed group of apparent Cuban exiles, Italian wise guys, and square-jawed military intel types. Who were these guys, we wondered, when we first saw it? What are they doing together in Mexico City? But when we first put out word that we needed to make some IDs, almost immediately a full-fledged disinformation campaign began, designed solely to discredit the photo. First, Seal's former brother-in-law, drug pilot Bill Bottoms, claimed it wasn't even a picture of Seal, but that was expected. Bottoms has long been on the Mena cleanup crew attempting to dispel what he termed the Mena myth. We took the picture to the helicopter pilot Ben Seal, Barry Seal's brother, before he arrived. We showed the photo to his son, Barry's nephew, Benji, also a helicopter pilot. He immediately pointed to the young Barry seated in the picture and exclaimed, "Uncle Barry." But when Ben Seal entered the room later, not knowing what his son had just confirmed, he denied his brother was in the picture. Finally, we received word from former CIA pilot Tosh Plumley, who had boasted of his longtime association and friendship with Barry Seal to us in an interview. Now he wanted us to know that he had seen the photo and that it was not what it appeared to be. He was himself one of the unidentified participants in the picture, he stated. It had been taken at a party of the narcs having a little fun after receiving awards from the American DEA in 1976. The Kerry Committee had this picture during their investigation, he said. It was old news. He even sent us the same photo back. as if he had it in his possession all the time, with a professionally printed caption across the top reading DEA Men Celebrating Awards. But the source of this photograph is what historians call a primary source, the best possible knowledge in the case. Barry Seal's widow, who had it hidden in a safe with when a seven-man team from the State Department arrived in 1995 to comb through her records. No one had been wearing skinny ties, as these men were in 1976, and of course there was no DEA in 1963. Some people had gone to some little trouble, the printed caption across the picture, to attempt to pass off a clumsy lie. But why? Suspicion about the sensitive nature of this picture were confirmed when we met a former military intelligence officer who had known and worked with Barry Seal since 1976 and known of him earlier. When he saw the Mexico City picture, his reaction was instantaneous and shocked. "Where did you get that picture?" he demanded. "They weren't supposed to be any pictures. Where did this come from?" His nervousness was explained by the identities of the people seated with Seal in that nightclub in Mexico City in 1963. They are members of the CIA super-secret assassination squad Operation 40. Seated with Barry Seal around that nightclub table are such later to be infamous figures as professional assassin and CIA agent Felix Rodriguez, who tracked down and killed Che Guevara in Bolivia, and who to this day, we are told, keeps Guevara's hands sitting in a jar in his dresser, and Watergate burglar Frank Sturgis covering his face with a sport coat, and William Houston Seymour, the New Orleans representative of Double Check Corporation, a CIA front used to recruit pilots like Barry Seal. These are people whose lives and careers are bound up in America's secret history, and Barry Seal was one of them. No one quibbles about Barry Seal's reputation as the most successful drug smuggler in American history. He was the most famous cocaine buccaneer in an era that abounded with them. He brought over $5 billion worth of cocaine into the United States, according to the government's own bean counters, to fuel the go-go 80s. Here, then, is Mina's big dirty secret. Barry Seal was no accident. He didn't stumble onto Mina, nor did he just happen to luck into his eventual drug smuggling career. Instead, he was a lifelong member of what E. Howard Hunt pluckishly refers to as clandestine services. But somehow Seal accomplished what is an extremely rare feat in the field of covert operations. Barry Seal became famous in certain circles. This was not thought to have been, on Mr. Seal's part, a particularly good career move. But then probably no one in Langley's domestic psyops division foresaw that Barry Seal's legend would grow and keep growing, and that during the course of 2 successive presidential scandals he would achieve a certain well-deserved folk hero status. Not for his drug smuggling, no, for that he deserves to go to jail, but for his poorly hidden fact for this poorly hidden fact, the true reason for his assassination. Barry Seal was getting ready to spill the beans. Biggie's getting set to talk, he told a family gathering at the last Easter Sunday he ever spent on Earth. That's gonna be some fireworks, that's for sure. The story of Barry Seal's life and violent assassinations is a thrilling ride into the most secret places in American life, a trip to a place where bad things happen and nobody cares. After you've been there, no place will look like Kansas anymore, ever again. This is the story of Barry Seal, the biggest drug smuggler in American history, who died in a hail of bullets with George Bush's private phone number in his wallet. And that's the end of chapter 1. My goodness.